And he used to have a Jesuit came round to play chess, and they would have great conversations about God. And Voltaire wasn't a Roman Catholic, although he was fond of many things to do about Catholicism, culturally and aesthetically. But he felt there were some problems with its formulation of theology. He was, and its ferocious history and persecution of Cathars and Protestants and Huguenots and witches. So anyway, the story is he was dying, old man dying off in his bed, and the priest came round, the Catholic priest came round for a deathbed conversion. And he said, he had the crucifix up, and he said in a great tone, he said, "Do you renounce Satan and all his works?" And Voltaire opened one eye and said, "I don't think now's the time to be making new enemies." Which is quite a typical Voltaire, witty kind of response, right? So that's, I think if we apply humour, I'm a Voltairean in that I believe humour is the best way to solve these problems, and that we should get these different gods and Satans and Lucifers to talk to the angels and the good ones, and we have to get a peace treaty between them all. So if that makes me, it makes me an ironic philosopher that believes it's better that we make peace in heaven and on earth than go on fighting this old-fashioned tale of the devil versus Satan versus God. Anyway, fast forward. So there are organised Satanist groups, very few. In the box we have listed maybe 10,000 active signed-up Satanists on the planet today. They just had a big conference actually in Boston. There's a network there's like a satanic church you can join. They're very clever and intellectual people who have done all the reading. They would love the periodic table, and it was interesting. It was that conference in Boston, which is like a grand gathering of all the Satanists of the world, and North America particularly. It took place at the same time as a conference I was attending online at Harvard University, looking at new religious movements and what goes wrong and what goes right with them. And they were clashing, but it took the satanic convention took place in Boston, and there'll be another one next year. So their position is that, what Satan actually represents is the marginalised and persecuted minority people throughout history, and that the witches, for example, or the minority faith that you don't like and you have to demonise and call heretics, and that so Satan became, in the Enlightenment time, he became a spokesman for the downtrodden and the persecuted and the socially unacceptable, right? So when I wrote a very detailed study of Marxism and its origins, and I discovered that in the Marxist tradition and times in 19th century France, it was drawing on this idea of the Enlightenment that Satan was actually the hero of history, and they associated him with Prometheus, who was the Greek kind of equivalent to Satan. He was Prometheus fell out with God, Zeus, because Prometheus knew the secret of the future. He was like the ovate of the gods, and Zeus wanted the secret of the future out of Prometheus. But Prometheus wouldn't tell. The secret, by the way, was that Zeus would not always be in power. All tyrants don't want to know that. They are like Putin and stuff. He would torture to death people that know when Putin will fall. But Prometheus wouldn't reveal this to Zeus. So Zeus chained him to the Caucasus Mountains and tortured him. Okay, back to Athens. Prometheus was honoured as the creator of mankind because Prometheus made our bodies out of clay, and Athena blew the spirit of life into us as humans. So in Athens, Prometheus was honoured and loved. And I discovered this when I went to the World Congress of Philosophy in Athens in 2013, and I researched it all. I went to the Parthenon spent a lot of time in libraries and all that. And I'm a great lover of Prometheus, you know. So in 18th century poetry, Keats and Shelley, they also revered Prometheus. And so much so that Shelley wrote a verse drama, Prometheus Unbound, which is about how Prometheus got let off the rock from his torturing. And guess who did it? It was Hercules, everybody's best friend. You know, you needed a god of that stature, who's half god and half human, by the way, which is why he was sympathetic to Prometheus. And he opposed this tyrannical thing from Zeus, his father, and secretly let Prometheus escape. And yeah, I'm trying to find out where Prometheus is now, if anyone knows. But he became an archetype, right? And the other thing is, he gave us fire. He gave us humans fire. Think where we'd be without fire. We wouldn't be able to sit up and have discussions. We'd have no electricity. We'd all go to bed at the minute it was dark, you know, and be freezing and shivering. So we owe Prometheus a great deal. And there's a wonderful fact that I've discovered, which is that in the ancient Academy of Athens, where Plato founded the academy, there was an altar to Prometheus in the grounds of the academy, which I've been to. I went in 2013 at the World Congress of Philosophy, and every year there was a torchlit running race between the grounds of the academy and the Parthenon of Athena in Athens, right? And Plato knew all this, which is why he put his academy there. And Francis Bacon, who was an enlightened sage and thinker, and you know, in his essays on ancient wisdom, he says those running races where the torch was passed, it was like a relay along with several miles up to the Parthenon and back, you had to bring it all the way back, and the first one back won the race, right? He said that's like science, because a thinker can only take the torch so far. You then pass it to the next generation or some other expert who comes along, and then they go on a bit, and then you bring it back. So what Bacon said is we should revive the worship of Prometheus. And that's what he was trying to do with scientific method. Does that make him a Satanist? You know, there are people that say Bacon was behind the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, etc., etc. Well, I support Bacon and the idea of the advancement of learning, which is what he wrote about. So in 19th century Italy, there was a great poet who was the most important poet in Italian literature at the time, who wrote a wonderful hymn, Carducci, to Satan, saying, like, you're on our side, you've been trying to help us, you represent the forward movement of humanity, our right to know, our right to have wisdom. Rather than to be oppressed and told what to believe, we want to think for ourselves. So Carducci's hymn to Satan is a masterpiece of European romantic literature, and Prometheus stroke Lucifer became a motif among the romantic movement. Now, all the people that are sort of posting, oh, you know, we support Putin, we support Tucker Carlson, we hate European Satanism, they haven't got a clue about the depth and meaning of all this. And, you know, I also don't agree with the witch hunting of communists and Marxists for being Satanists, which unfortunately some people on the extreme right, like Hitler and others, and Putin now have done. In my commentary on Das Kapital, I'm trying to show that Marx was trying to liberate mankind from the downside of capitalism and finding a communist system that would work for everybody. Now that was common. That was the common project of 19th century Romanticism. I regard Marx as the last of the Romantics. But anyway, so it's interesting. And there are organised groups of Satanists. I mean, they wouldn't all be able to give the detailed explanation I've given, necessarily. And yes, they dress up in funny robes and invoke and do ceremonies, but, you know, I think on the whole they're pretty harmless, myself. And I don't agree with the witch hunting of Satanism. I have another story. One of my heroes, influencers, was a man called Chogyam Trungpa, who was a great Tibetan Buddhist in the Mahayana Tantric tradition from Tibet. He wrote an amazing book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which really inspired me when I was a late teenager setting out on the spiritual path. He helped found Sammy Ling in Scotland, which is a retreat centre where many of my friends have been over the years, and I've taught at its retreat centre at Holy Island off Scotland, which is owned by the monks of Sammy Ling. So Chogyam Trungpa was a very great genius, and his Shambhala teachings carry on. I have a friend who was his personal close disciple in London back in the 70s, and when he did a degree at Oxford University, by the way, because he wanted to marry up Tibetan Buddhist teachings with Western psychological teachings. So he did a degree in psychology at Oxford. And he was getting all dressed up one evening, and my friend said, "Where are you going, Chogyam? You know, what are you putting on those, putting on the special clothes for?" He said, "Well, I'm going to talk to the London Organisation of Satanists about Buddhist Dharma," and he took it seriously, and he went and gave them a lecture which they loved, because in Buddhism, Mara, who is the tempter, the devil, can be defeated by applying mindfulness, right thought, right action, right speech. He's there to test us, and he tested Buddha by hurling flaming arrows at him on the night of his enlightenment. If you can't face a little lodge of Satanists and have a decent conversation, you haven't got any, you shouldn't be around teaching, really, would be Chogyam Trungpa's position. So I think there's a conversation to be had here, and I'd rather, in the Philosophy Club, be having that conversation with the leaders of all the faiths, including the Satanists, getting us all talking, instead of hurling bombs at each other. I just think that'd be more mature and a much better way to use the resources of this planet, which are precious and finite, and we mustn't muck it about. And then finally, just to say, the Yazidis are another satanic, interesting group from the Middle East. And they got their own box, actually. Number 32, I put them in the pagans, but, their position is they worship the ancient wisdom deity of Iblis, which is the Satan of Islam. And the tradition, if you read the Quran and do the commentary that I've written, if you study that, Muhammad didn't like Iblis at all. He's always going, you've got to defeat Iblis. And if you go on pilgrimage to Mecca, you throw a stone at a pillar that represents Iblis. So it's a very, very anti-satanic kind of orthodox Islam I'm talking about. Well, is that the right word? I don't know. But the Yazidis say they know the real story of what happened. Because the traditional story of Iblis is that, and this is in the Quran, it's the story that Muhammad knew, which is that Iblis was a very, very great angel at the beginning of the world. And he was made of fire, and he long predated this world, along with other angels, Gabriel and all the others. They were God's sort of special top agents, generals of light. And then God created planet Earth and humans. And he was very impressed. He thought he'd done great work. He created Adam and Eve, and aren't they great? And he said to all the angels, bow down and worship them. They're amazing, aren't they? Look, they can talk, they can move about, they're really intelligent, they're little creatures. And Iblis refused. And for that, God threw him out of heaven and cast him down, and he moved to hell and became the sort of lord of the resistance armies against God's tyrannical rule. That's the orthodox official answer, tradition in the Quran. And that's what the mainstream mosque teachers will tell you. If you go to the mosque and say, "I want to become a Muslim," then that's the story they'll tell you. Right? My understanding of this is a bit different and more akin to the Yazidis and the Sufis, because what the Yazidis say is they predate Muhammad. They have a much ancient wisdom that was old when Muhammad wasn't even born. And according to their story, the actual truth of what happened is very different. Iblis said to God, when he said worship humans, Iblis said, my Lord, you're asking me, like an angel, 50 million light years tall, ancient as like trillions of years, made of light and energy and pure consciousness. You're asking me to worship this little clay creature you've made, who look, he's got some moral problems. He's already fighting and shouting and throwing stones at his brother. No, I'm not going to do that, because I only worship you, Lord. You're the creator. You're the superpower of the universe. So I'm going to be faithful to you and only worship you. And according to the Yazidis, God turned round to Iblis and said, you've answered right. That's the right answer. And all the other angels were tricked into just like, oh, well, if God says we should do it, we should do it. But Iblis thought it out for himself and said, no, I'm only going to worship the real divine superpower, you know. So the Yazidis hold on fiercely to that gnosis that they have, older than the Quran, older than the Bible. That there is a supernatural authority higher than this planet, much older. That's God, Allah, whatever you want to call it. They call it the glorious peacock. Actually, is the name of their idea of the absolute deity, and and for that, and they've survived ever since. They have very strong, network of esoteric teachers, and they've been persecuted by the Muslims down the centuries. And the ISIS cult, which is a sort of Sunni, literalist, very downgraded view of Islam, has been trying to kill them all. And when in Iraq, they rounded up Yazidis and just slaughtered them. And they were on a mountain, forced up into the mountain, and they were trying to kill them all. I've met people that helped, and the West, fortunately, sent in airlifts and we got them off the mountain. And I've heard Yazidis speak, very, very grateful that we saved their lives. So this thing about what is Satan and should we have a conversation about it is kind of important in the Middle East. And I think you can gauge the maturity intellectually of a thinker by where they stand on this. As I would say Voltaire would have agreed. We've got to have a win-win for all humanity. And this is the problem I have with Trump-type evangelicals. They're really into the Satan story. Trump's going to win, he's going to bring peace and light and win against all the dark forces and bring Satan down. And they're all funding each other and giving each other talk on talk shows. They literally believe in Satan's reality as something they have to defeat. And if that means bombing and killing millions of Palestinians or Iranians, these people want to go to war with Iran. I mean, these people are crazy as far as I'm concerned. I think Biden is much more sensible. Let's have peace in heaven and on earth, rather than a kind of war to end all wars, which is what Putinism and Trumpism want. So anyway, sorry, that's quite a long answer, but any comments, questions about those two? They're quite interesting, aren't they? John Wesley and the Methodists didn't like Satan, obviously. They'd be appalled at my explanation of things. But then nor did Thatcher. That's why she shut up the Druids of Stonehenge, or tried to. Didn't succeed.
I was a little surprised when I wrote on some papers, is it true or not, I don't know, I may ask you, about the opening ceremony of London Olympic Games, and as well opening ceremony of the tunnel in the Alps, were some kind of satanic ceremonies. Did you heard of that?
I've heard of that theory. Yeah. Mm.
And when we see the images, it's quite...
They can be seen as
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I was in Britain at the time of the Olympic Games. I didn't like those opening ceremonies. I didn't like the choreography. I didn't think it was well done. I seem to remember James Bond was pushed out of a plane by the Queen. I quite liked that. bit of that.
Mm.
I just think it wasn't very well done. I just think it wasn't. I mean, for it to have been officially like an official satanic ceremony thing done by a coven in London, no, I think that's ridiculous theory. They're not that intelligent. And no Satanist worth their salt would have participated in such a silly ceremony. We would have done it with much greater style and artistic, creative, aplomb. Sorry, I said we, I meant they, right? I did give a lecture at the University of Oxford on all this, which is, I think, on my YouTube channel way back. It was recorded, and the title was Karl Marx a Satanist? I was asked to speak to the philosophy club at the University of Oxford, and I had fun doing that. And then I did a repeat at Birkbeck College, London. And as for the opening tunnel thing, no, I don't think that's true either. I think these are Putin-inspired anti-Western smears that they will try and confuse everybody to think that, oh, there are Satanists running London or Paris or Strasbourg. No, it's absolute nonsense. There are free thinkers there, and there are people that would support what I've been saying about Voltaire and the right. I mean, in Paris in the 19th century, it's quite chic to be a Satanist. A lot of people like Gérard de Nerval and Baudelaire, they took the cause of Satan because he seemed to speak for the dispossessed and the persecuted. He was the voice of women often, who didn't get a look in the official church and stuff. So it was quite chic. But I don't think they were doing anything evil or wicked behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's like in the arts, it's a kind of provocation. It's not really an ideology or a belief.
That's one way it manifests, and if you look at surrealism and certain aspects of modern art, it's about provoking old thinking to take a new stand, to renew itself. I think Prometheus is a necessary force for history. And also I discovered something interesting, just to share a little news flash. Don't quote me on this, and I hope the wrong people don't hear this, but I discovered this. According to tradition, Prometheus and Athena had a love affair in Athens, and that would explain why Zeus was so annoyed with Prometheus and had him chained up, because he was in love with his daughter, Athena, who was the virgin queen, right? So I think that's a beautiful story, that Prometheus, the creator of mankind, and Athena, co-created us and were lovers. Now I prefer that as a beautiful myth than this kind of, sort of war to the death between. We can't afford to have a war to death between matter and spirit, or emotion and mind. I'm for healing and peacemaking between all aspects of human nature. Satan is one of the archetypes that exists in the collective unconscious. Jung writes a lot about this as well. And so is Christ, and so is Buddha. We need them all to work together and reach a kind of synthesis, as the Saggioli said, a psychosynthesis that heals this split. Okay, there we are, that's that. Jolly exciting. Right, well, talking of the devil, shall we do our tarot of the gods and see what comes up? You never know. There is a card to Satan in there, but there's also cards to Ahura Mazda and, all the gang. This Tarot of the Gods is a huge work. It took me over a year to produce, based on 30 years of research. So if you haven't got your copy yet, get the Tarot of the Gods. It's the most academic, detailed study of the tarot that I know of. We've had him recently. We won't have Bell, although we love him, we can have that one, that's quite a nice one.
Okay.
Ptah, yeah, we like Ptah. Right,
Shall I leave him out?
sure, and then hand them over.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so, I mean, there are other, hundreds of tarot packs you can get, but this seems to me the most detailed. Yes, we had him recently. I think we'll let's try and have one we haven't had. That's Krishna, wants you to come back in.
Oh, I want you to come through, Daddy.
I know, but we love Krishna, but he can wait.
Wow.
We've had him, Baal, yeah,
Oh,
we had him.
Daddy.
Well, there's loads. I think it's time to do a new one. Okay, let's have Marduk. Yeah, he's quite fun. We haven't had him for a while, if ever. 2 of fire, right? So, okay, so these these are ancient gods. One from Egypt, one from Mesopotamia. We have the 2 of earth, which is Ptah, and we have the 2 of fire, Marduk. I'll start with the 2 of earth, Ptah. This card was made by my Syrian friend who came to stay here, and she was a brilliant artist, so she did the cards. And he's got a Masonic apron because Freemasonry in some ways is a continuation of the ancient Egyptian mysteries. That's why Napoleon was so interested in Egypt and supported Freemasonry in the Napoleonic Empire. And Ptah is about balance and multitasking. As the 2 of earth, he's responsible for creating technical, practical stuff. He's the patron saint of architects. And since Freemasons worship the great architect, they see God as an architect. Ptah is essentially their line manager as a deity. Now, Ptah is very interesting because Egypt, of course, we know as the place of the pyramids, and Egyptian architects were incredibly sophisticated and well trained. I mean, I've not been to the pyramids, but I'm told by people who have that the blocks of stone are really, really close fitting. The whole thing is an architectural masterpiece. And how did they get them so well aligned? How did they work out the chamber that points towards certain stars? How was all this done? Well, it was done because of Ptah and their knowledge of divine architecture. The Egyptians believed that Ptah is the master architect of the universe, and if you became an architect in ancient Egypt, you were initiated into his secrets. He designed and built this fabulous universe with everything in it fitting together to perfection. And the more we study, science, DNA, the structures of life, the more it does seem to be quite a divine thing going on here. And I know that conventional science says, no, it's all evolved by chance, big bang, scattering of elements, and it's all seeded by chance. But there are arguments against that purely materialistic argument. And I think Ptah stands for the divine intelligence underlying reality. There's a depth to existence. I tried to explain this in my 3-volume work on the principles of religious mathematics, Philosophiae Religionis, Principia Mathematica, which I published in 2021. I think if you look at mathematics, you can see the incredible sophistication behind matter and behind nature, which is beyond. I mean, we can't even begin to work it out yet. We know some of the architects of ancient Egypt. One was called Imhotep. He was a sage, and he was regarded as the son of Ptah. And Imhotep means he who comes in peace, because Hotep is Egyptian for peace. I've always loved Imhotep. He was a historical figure in the late 27th century BC, became the Chancellor of Egypt and the chief architect of Pharaoh Djoser. And he was the architect of Djoser's Step Pyramid, which is still standing 4,000, 5,000 years later. And it was the first of the really important pyramids, which were then modelled on it. So Imhotep is a sage, who deserves to be honoured by all religions, in my opinion. He was a peace lover. The centre of Ptah's cult was at Memphis, which is just near where the pyramids were built. And the location of Imhotep's tomb has never been found. Some say it's hidden at Saqqara, which is a small town a little south of Cairo and just west of Memphis. Imhotep was also the author of certain famous wisdom texts, and these are very similar to Proverbs and things that later went into the Bible, because the Jews spent a lot of time in Egypt learning. Moses represents that transmission from ancient Egyptian wisdom into Judaism, and much of the best bits of Judaism came from Egypt, and Imhotep and his type were wisdom teachers. So there's a the titles of Imhotep were Prince, Royal Seal Bearer of the King of Lower Egypt, High Priest of Heliopolis, Director of Sculptors. This is on a plinth that's actually in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The Greeks, when they turned up in Egypt, and there was a long love affair between Greek civilization and Egyptian, which is still going on. Alexander came and respected Egypt. He didn't want to conquer it as such. He talked to them at the gates of the city on the edge of Egypt and said, look, you know, I've conquered like loads of other places. I don't really want to go to war with you. Why don't you just let me in? You know, after all, I am, you know, quite special. And the Egyptian priesthood conferred, and they let Alexander in, and they appointed him ruler of Egypt. And he was initiated into the Egyptian spirituality and crowned as a pharaoh of Egypt. He then went to the oracle at Siwa in the far west of Egypt, crossed the sands to get there, and the oracle proclaimed him to be the son of Amun, the son of the secret god behind the universe, who they associated with Zeus, which is quite a big thing to be told you're the son of the creator. That was the Egyptian way of honouring Alexander, and he reciprocated. Total freedom of religion, he loved their culture, he wore their clothes when he was there, and the Greeks and the Egyptians began a love affair, which has lasted really to this day, and he founded the city of Alexandria as an homage to Egyptian and Greek marriage of culture. And the Greeks said Ptah, and was, you know, they adopted him as their god, and Imhotep they associated with Asclepius, the god of healing, because Imhotep was also a doctor, and all his knowledge, which is architecture, also applies to knowledge of the body, the physical body. What are we made of? How can you heal? That's a kind of a biological, architectural question. So Imhotep was honoured, and the Egyptians, agreed with that. Another sage associated with Ptah was Ptahhotep, meaning the peace of Ptah, who was around in the 25th century BC. I mean, it's amazing to me. These people, we have their writings. There's a text come down called the Maxims of Ptahhotep, an early piece of Egyptian wisdom literature to instruct young people in school age or university age on right action. Yes. So anyway, if you want the details of Ptah, look at the text of the Tarot of the Gods. It's pretty awesome, really. I mean, I know we think we're so sophisticated in Europe and the West and America, and we've got AI and all that, but, Ptah was the master of intelligence before the planet was even created. Interestingly, I had somebody come around the museum recently to look at things and thinking of moving to this area.